Your degree isn't essential, buddy, Gerald Stone said, chewing his gum like it owed him rent. My son's taking over next quarter anyway. We need someone who actually understands today's systems, not the stuff you learned in your college tower 20 years ago. That was the first time he said it out loud in front of a full conference room. Finance, HR, marketing, even two guys from facilities heard it. Nobody laughed. Nobody said a thing either. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the dull tap of Gerald's silver pen bouncing off the table like a cheap metronome, counting down the seconds until the next insult. The fluorescent tubes overhead flickered with a faint, irritating buzz that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. Valiant Industries had once been a place of high standards, but under Gerald's leadership, it was rapidly turning into a playground for cheap cost-cutting and superficial branding. I sat there still, not frozen, but still like the eye of a hurricane. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, legs crossed at the ankle, that scar on my left thumb catching a bit of light from the window. I had gotten that scar rewiring a legacy data system alone at 1 a.m. during a merger panic back in 2018, just a year after I started at Valiant Industries. No one remembered that now. Not Gerald, not Hunter, not any of the strategic visionaries, now crowding the boardroom with their vape pens and reusable water bottles shaped like dumbbells. But I remembered. And I remembered this, too. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Instead, I reached for my notepad, clicked my pen once, and under the table, clicked record on the innocuous-looking keychain I always kept clipped to my laptop bag. Company policy said nothing about personal keychains. And as Gerald launched into another speech about how agility meant ignoring Gantt charts and just going with the flow, I calmly made another little tick mark in the margin of my notes, like I was counting ants at a picnic. It had started subtly at first. A sarcastic thanks professor when I presented a 3-tier risk mitigation structure for the vendor migration. A joke during a quarterly all-hands about how Daniel probably uses a typewriter at home. And that one Slack message where Gerald replied too long didn't read to a 3-sentence compliance brief. I reported that one to HR. They thanked me for raising visibility and logged it for internal reference. That meant absolutely nothing happened. It wasn't just words. The quiet cuts came next. Access restrictions, calendar invites where my name got accidentally left off. A sudden audit of my department's budget flagged as bloated, even though I had come in 15% under for the last 3 fiscal years. Then came the reorganization proposal. Cross-functional streamlining, Gerald called it. He had stuck me between procurement and legal in a new structure called operational enablement. It sounded fancy, but it meant nothing. I was now 5 steps removed from anything that actually mattered, but I took the title change with a nod. Director of Systems Strategy became Process Lead Legacy Oversight. Someone asked what that meant. Gerald shrugged and said he is the janitor for the old stuff. I didn't fight it. Not then. Because the thing about systems, real systems, not the PowerPoint ones, is that they don't collapse all at once. They rot slowly, quietly. You don't notice until the basement floods and the power is out, and suddenly you are screaming at a fuse box you never bothered to label. I was the label for 9 years. I had been the duct tape and steel mesh holding the digital spine of Valiant Industries together since 2017. I didn't make noise about it. I didn't use phrases like scalable synergy. When the 2020 transition from legacy secure to Omnipath nearly blew up the customer data archive, I was the one who saved it on a Sunday with no overtime, working in my sandals using a half-dead VPN and one string of emergency shell commands that shouldn't have even worked. Now I watched Gerald swing his new title around like a drunk with a sledgehammer, mocking my process diagrams in front of his son Hunter. Hunter hadn't written a single line of code in his life, but he had the audacity to say, "Daniel, I think you're just scared of innovation." Scared? No, my friend. Scared was sitting in my apartment in 2018, praying a security patch wouldn't crash the mainframe over the holiday weekend, because the only other person who could have helped was in another country and completely off the grid. This was just theater, and I was writing the script quietly behind the scenes. After each public humiliation, I didn't complain, I didn't rage. I copied files, I printed backups, I documented change logs, I reviewed employee manuals, and I cross-checked legal clauses. I made sure my signature wasn't on anything new, nothing Gerald could pin to me once the glue holding his empire started to melt. And I scheduled something, a memo, a small compliance packet, one that would email itself to the chairman of the board automatically under one specific condition if the project lead was changed within 14 days of a critical federal submission. I had timed it like a landmine, not because I was vindictive, but because I had been called irrelevant. And the system I designed, the one Gerald called cluttered, it didn't care about his title. It didn't care who his son was. It cared about sequence and timelines and consequences. I just made sure someone would hear the click before the boom. It happened on a Thursday. Rain had slicked the parking lot like a layer of oil, and I had arrived early, 6:43 a.m., like always. By 8:12 a.m., I was sitting in conference room C with a lukewarm coffee and a printed quarterly roadmap folded in my lap like a surrender flag I had no intention of waving. Gerald strutted in 4 minutes late, his eyes bloodshot like he had either been drinking or congratulating himself in front of a mirror all night. HR trailed behind him, a woman named Brenda, who used to lead diversity training, and now spent most of her days pretending Gerald's decisions made sense. Gerald didn't sit, just leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed over a new button-down shirt that still had a visible crease from the packaging. He smiled like a man who believed he was doing me a favor. "We are going in a different direction," he said. I blinked once, slowly. Gerald continued, "It is not personal, of course. You've done good work, really, Daniel, but we are trying to modernize, be more adaptive, and frankly, we need someone who speaks the language of now." Brenda shifted uncomfortably. She had a clipboard and a packet stapled with my name in thick blue ink. It had the smell of something rehearsed and disinfected. I looked up. Who was replacing me? Gerald didn't hesitate. "Hunter." I stared at him. No expression, no raised eyebrows, no twitch of the mouth. Gerald misread the silence as approval. He's young, hungry, full of ideas. The kind of fresh perspective the board has been begging for. I didn't remind him the board had never asked for anything of the sort. I didn't mention that Hunter, at last count, had abandoned 2 startups, flunked out of his MBA program, and once asked me if SSSL was a kind of sandwich. Instead, I looked at Brenda. "Is this effective immediately?" Brenda nodded like she had practiced it in the mirror that morning. "Yes, but we are giving you the rest of the day to gather your things." Gerald was kind enough to waive the 2-week transition period. "How generous," I said flatly, my voice like frost forming on a window. I stood up slowly and precisely, not a single movement wasted. My bag was already packed under the table. My laptop, charger, notebooks, and one manila folder marked Q4 architecture, backup. I handed over my badge, not to Gerald, to Brenda deliberately. Gerald gave a final wave. "No hard feelings, right? And if you ever want to consult, maybe help Hunter on board." I looked at him with the kind of quiet that made people sweat in silence. "He will be fine," I said. "I am sure he knows exactly what he is doing." And then I left. I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't make a farewell post on Slack. I didn't cry in the stairwell or hug anyone goodbye. I walked straight to the parking garage, climbed into my aging Volvo, and sat with my hands on the wheel for exactly 3 minutes. No music, no tears, just the soft ping of a notification on my phone. One message sent. Compliance packet queued, 13 days remaining. It was an automated system I had built myself during the vendor overhaul in March 2026. Buried in the compliance framework of Valiant Industries, it was designed to create a chain of accountability if leadership changed during key transition phases of a federal review. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even secret, just highly technical and specific. It was overlooked because nobody reads the fine print of their own safety nets. I had attached my final submission to it the night before, and in the quiet dark of my apartment, I triple-checked the timer. If the lead on that project changed hands within 14 business days of the federal review, the packet would trigger an addendum clause. That clause would send a full report, including financial exposure estimates and leadership reassignment flags, to the board's compliance liaison, and by default to the assistant of the chairman's, Lawrence Atwood. Gerald hadn't read it. Of course he hadn't. He had called me too academic while I wrote the procedural scaffolding that made his job possible. He had laughed at my documentation while building his empire on systems I alone understood. Now he was flying blind and proud of it, at 3:08 p. a.m., I pulled off the highway and into the self-storage lot where I kept my backup drives. I wasn't paranoid, I was methodical. 3 copies, 1 cloud encrypted, 1 cold storage, and 1 analog archive. I removed the flash drive from my glove compartment and checked the label. Sierra Stack Final Config. I didn't need it, but it felt good to hold something solid. Later that evening, I declined every call from former colleagues, ignored 2 LinkedIn messages and 3 texts from Brenda that started with just checking in. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and removed myself from every admin panel I had ever touched. Then I sat back, opened a blank text document, and titled it simply Transfer of Liability Contingency Notes. I didn't know when they would realize what they had done, but I knew they would. And when they did, they would realize that the compliance system I left behind wasn't just a set of rules, it was a legal trap, designed to protect Valiant Industries from executive negligence by shifting the entire burden of failure directly onto Gerald Stone. Hunter Stone showed up on Monday wearing sneakers with no socks and a blazer that still had the stitched brand label running down the sleeve. He strolled into the operations wing like he was auditioning for a startup drama. The first thing he did was unplug my dual monitor setup and replace it with his laptop and a scented candle. No joke, he lit a vanilla bean candle right there on my old desk. He called an impromptu meeting at 10:07 a.m. Alignment jam, he called it. "All right," Hunter said, putting his feet up on the desk. "We are killing all that legacy garbage. If you can't explain a system to me in under 60 seconds, it's too complicated. Simplicity is innovation." He gave everyone 24 hours to submit bullet point summaries of their workflows. Not one of them had fewer than 3 critical dependencies tied to the retired system stack I had built. Hunter didn't read them. He skimmed the first page of each, slapped a note on it that said TBD, and threw them in a recycled box under his desk. He canceled the biweekly vendor review call, claiming it was a waste of time. He told procurement they would just rebuild contracts from scratch if they needed to. When Julian, my former deputy, asked about the compliance packets scheduled for final review next week, Hunter waved his hand. "We will figure it out," he said. "Just streamline it." The operations team watched in horror as years of meticulous structural planning were tossed aside in the name of agility and speed. By Wednesday, accounts payable froze 2 contractor invoices due to missing metadata. Hunter accused the finance software of being outdated. When finance explained that Daniel had maintained those permissions manually through a layered override system, Hunter responded, "Yeah, we don't do override matrices anymore. I trust people." His trust, however, did not pay the bills, and the contractors began threatening to halt all ongoing maintenance work. The system stopped trusting him back almost immediately. 2 engineers had their access revoked due to mismatched credentials during a system refresh. The sandbox testing environment got completely wiped. Customer support flagged a weird surge of ticket duplication from the new auto-tag integration Hunter approved without any technical review. He blamed my labyrinth. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of suburban silence, I sat on my back porch, my laptop closed, reading a paperback novel. The rain tapped against the roof like a slow countdown. Every once in a while, my phone buzzed. I didn't respond, but I read everything. A text from Julian read, "They lost the master schema. Hunter said we don't need it." What does that even mean? An email from the facilities manager read, "Just FYI, Hunter tried to override the badge system, and now none of the executives can access the secure floor. Security is furious." A Slack message from Sarah in legal, sent via a personal burner account, read, "Did you leave anything behind to help us?" He is deleting configuration files like it is a game of Minesweeper. I didn't reply. I did open my private cloud storage and check the access logs. Hunter had already tried to open the private documentation folder I had wiped clean before leaving. He tried twice at 1:42 a.m. and 1:57 a.m. on Sunday morning. Panic always arrives between midnight and sunrise. On Thursday afternoon, Hunter posted a company-wide update. The subject line was, "Rocket, a new era begins." The email read like a pitch deck. "Team, we are streamlining processes and leaving outdated complexities in the past. Expect faster rollouts, leaner workflows, and a more empowered culture. If you have questions, send them to my assistant." His assistant was a 23-year-old named Tiffany, who once asked me how to convert a PDF into a regular Word document so she could put emojis in it. She promptly forwarded all technical questions to Hunter's junk folder. No answers came. By Friday, the IT department ran a security audit. It wasn't standard procedure, just a cautious pulse check because something felt off. The audit returned 2 yellow flags and 1 red flag. When presented with the findings, Hunter squinted at the report and said, "Is this like a firewall thing?" The IT lead, Roger, who had been at Valiant Industries longer than Gerald, called me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't complain. He just said, "You might want to keep your backup drives close." I responded with a single text, 4 days left. Roger didn't ask what that meant, but he did start copying his own documentation onto a personal flash drive, one of those old silver ones from a trade show. Internally, people started whispering. Not in meetings, since nobody wanted to get flagged, but in kitchen corners, behind locked channels, and via old group texts. Something was unraveling slowly, but undeniably, and Hunter was still talking about installing a football table in the break room. It was quiet. That specific kind of corporate quiet that hums just beneath the surface, where people still show up, still hold meetings, and still send calendar invites, but everyone is looking at each other like they are waiting for a fuse to burn down behind the drywall. On Tuesday morning, our compliance officer named Eleanor did something dangerous. She followed protocol. She wasn't a troublemaker. She wore cardigans with little bird prints and color-coded her folders. But she had been on my regulatory team during the initial compliance transition, and she knew there was a federal review scheduled for the following Thursday. I had called it the blackout line. Once crossed, every file, process, and approval would have to meet the 2026 Integrity Audit Standard. There would be no exceptions, no grandfathering. It was designed to prevent exposure after our Q3 restructuring, acting as a federal safeguard after a vendor incident last year nearly tanked our liability coverage. Eleanor sent an email to Gerald at 8:01 a.m. The subject line was, "Regulatory Phase 2 Review Date, Confirmation." She attached the tracking sheet I had built, highlighted the pending fields, and added a polite note. Would Hunter or someone else be presenting the documentation previously prepared by Daniel? Just want to ensure we are on track. She knew the federal penalties for noncompliance could reach up to $450,000, not to mention the potential loss of Valiant's operating license. Gerald never answered. Hunter did. At 10:36 a.m., Eleanor received a response that simply read, "We're good. We don't need that dinosaur process anymore. We are running agile now." There was no greeting, no sign-off, just that. Eleanor read it twice, blinked and flagged the message. She didn't reply. Instead, she printed it and slid it into the back of her just-in-case file, the same folder where she kept screenshots of outdated training modules and vendor non-disclosure agreement inconsistencies. HR had once called her paranoid. I had called her thorough. She preferred my word. That same afternoon, 3 independent contractors, network specialists from Apex Delta, walked off the job. They hadn't been paid for 29 days, freezing $85,000 in critical invoices. They had submitted their invoices twice. Finance claimed they were missing escalation tags. But those tags had been part of the workflow Hunter had deleted, and Hunter had told Finance to stop babying the third-party contractors. In the exit email from the Apex Delta lead, there was a single line under the sign-off. "This is not a Daniel problem. This is a leadership decision problem." The phrase was screenshotted and passed around internal chats like a meme. The loss of these specialists meant that any sudden system crash would remain unresolved, leaving our core database completely vulnerable. Meanwhile, in a house with thick curtains and zero corporate lighting, I received a text from Julian. They just ignored the Phase 2 flag. "Eleanor is about to have a heart attack." I didn't reply, but I pulled up my calendar. At 3 p.m., an event labeled lunch with Dad clicked over to completed at exact time in a quiet, unassuming server center in Boston. An automated compliance program triggered a scheduled mail queue. A file compiled 3 weeks earlier, embedded with a secure timestamp, began its journey through secured channels. I had named it harmlessly Q3 Audit, Notice Alt Route PDF, and embedded it within a nested compliance thread previously marked inactive. The system didn't know corporate politics. It didn't care about Hunter or Gerald or who was or wasn't attending alignment jams. It only knew two things. Daniel's name had been removed from the compliance chain within the protected window, and a replacement had been assigned with no attached Phase 2 completion tag. At 3:08 p.m., the board's shared compliance inbox received an email titled, Change of Project Owner Contingency Notice, Regulatory Phase 2. Attached was a 17-page memorandum. The first line read, Per Procedural Clause 9b, under Internal Regulatory Policy TSHA C2237F, please note the triggering of the liability transfer window due to reassignment within the protected timeframe. See signature validation on page 6. This action places accountability for Phase 2 compliance on the initiating executive party. At the bottom of page 17 was a single line signed digitally by Daniel. Final submission timestamp per Section 5B compliant with 14-day lock protocol. Audit fallback engaged, the message was silent. No fireworks, no alarms. Just a soft digital arrival into an inbox. Nobody checked hourly except the assistant of the chairman, Lawrence Atwood, who read everything twice. Back in the office, Hunter was busy redesigning the internal dashboard. Less clutter, he said, removing a column called Compliance Checkpoints and replacing it with a live GIF of a progress bar that looped endlessly at 97%. Someone in finance asked if they should wait for updated protocols before cutting the next contractor checks. Nah, Hunter shrugged. Daniel's system was always overkill. In the server logs, another silent event ticked over, Phase 2 compliance owner null. I was gardening when Julian texted again. This time he didn't bother with pleasantries. Daniel, did you do something? I stared at the message. I had dirt under my fingernails and a single cucumber half buried in the raised bed. I typed one word, yes. Then I muted the thread. The email came through at 9:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. The subject line was, Quarterly Review Board Audit Attendance Confirmed. The text was clear. Chairman Lawrence Atwood will attend the audit in person. Gerald nearly fell out of his expensive ergonomic chair. This is it, he whispered. I am going to show the board what real operational transformation looks like. He burst into the operations bullpen, clapping his hands. Team, the chairman himself is coming next Friday. We are going to dazzle them. Hunter, lounging in my old chair with his feet up, smirked. Redefining the entire structure, baby, he said. Legacy is out, Agile is in. Gerald chuckled, then turned to Sarah from legal. Can you make sure our presentation includes that new dashboard Hunter rolled out? Sarah blinked. The one with the looping progress bar? Exactly. Gerald nodded. It's modern. The planning meetings ramped up fast. Gerald scheduled strategy showcases to get the executive team aligned. My name still appeared on the agenda for the Phase 2 transition lead, Daniel Vance, which was pulled from compliance filings. Gerald crossed it out with a red Sharpie and wrote, replaced by Hunter Stone. Hunter leaned over and grinned. Think they'll ask about him? Gerald snorted. Please, Atwood is old school. He wants results on the day before the audit. Eleanor from compliance walked into the break room, pale as drywall. They removed the fail-safe protocol from the mainframe, she whispered to Julian. Daniel's clause, she said. It is live. And if the chairman brings up Phase 2 compliance, Julian already knew. He opened his private inbox and saw my message. Don't interfere, just observe. The audit was scheduled for 9 a.m. Friday. At 8:55 a.m., the conference room had that manufactured chill. Legal, finance, and HR sat with their laptops closed, preparing for the worst. At 9:02 a.m., Hunter breezed in with a clicker in hand. Gerald followed, radiating smugness. All right, Gerald clapped his hands. Let's kick this off. Hunter stepped up and clicked the remote. Ops 2.0, redefining the structure of now. We've rebuilt our operational core. Leaner, smarter, cleaner. He clicked to a slide of the Sierra Stack platform. Sarah raised her head slowly. You mean the legacy secure overlay? Hunter blinked. No, we scrapped that. Daniel's system was too cluttered. Julian, seated in the corner, didn't move. Hunter clicked to the next slide. We've optimized SLA compliance by integrating with the RDP framework. Do you mean DRC? One of the finance analysts interrupted. Disaster recovery compliance, right? Yeah, Hunter said. But we don't need that. Not with our current uptime. Sarah's lips finally moved. You eliminated the disaster recovery protocol? Well, yeah, we've had 99.9% uptime. The risk is minimal, the engineers exchanged a look. Gerald stepped in. Let's not get bogged down in technicals. We've moved beyond Daniel's old system. It was slow. A second later, the screen behind them glitched. The slide disappeared, and a blue desktop background flickered. I think we lost the deck, Hunter said. Then, the door creaked open, and in stepped Chairman Lawrence Atwood, gray suit, leather folio under one arm. He didn't speak, he just looked around the room, scanning each face. His eyes landed on my old seat, the one that still had my nameplate. He frowned. Is Daniel? No preamble, just that. Gerald chuckled awkwardly. Daniel? Well, he has moved on. My son Hunter is leading operations now. Hunter gave a half wave. Excited to bring some fresh blood, sir. Chairman Atwood didn't return the gesture. He placed his leather folio on the table and opened it. He removed a single folded packet of paper and slid it across the table. Do you know what this is? Gerald cleared his throat. Well, no, but if it's about Daniel's exit, that was. Atwood held up 2 fingers. Gerald stopped talking. The chairman turned the memo around. Change of project owner contingency notice regulatory phase 2. This landed in the board's compliance inbox 2 days ago. Time delivery from Daniel Vance. It's a regulatory tripwire, Atwood said. It states that if the project lead is reassigned within 14 business days of the final compliance submission, all accountability, including legal and regulatory liability, transfers to the initiating executive permanently. This is a direct application of the breach of fiduciary duty under our corporate bylaws. You are personally liable for any federal compliance fines. Gerald's face melted like wax. That can't be binding. Legal signed off. Atwood raised an eyebrow. Did they sign this? He flipped to page 6. Sarah Reynolds looked. Oh my God, there it was. Signature, timestamp, validation code, internal legal sign-off. Atwood pushed the document to Gerald. I am going to ask again. Where is Daniel? Gerald opened his mouth, searching the room. We let him go. Atwood straightened up. You thought you understood his value. Thought if he didn't shout, he didn't matter. But he wasn't building systems. He was building containment, guardrails, firewalls, and you pulled him out mid-flight. From his pocket, the chairman pulled out a phone, tapped the screen, and looked at Sarah. Please call an executive session. Now Gerald turned to Hunter, whispering, fix this. But Hunter just stared at the memo, transfer of accountability, initiating executive Gerald D. Stone. Atwood walked to the window. People really thought Daniel was the dinosaur. He shook his head. No, he was the firewall. The executive board acted immediately. Gerald was stripped of authority, and Hunter was escorted out by security. The system restore script was initiated by Julian. One by one, the dashboards flickered back to life. Audit trails recompiled. I was deep in a forest trail when my phone buzzed with a message from Atwood's assistant. Would you be open to a consulting role? Flexible terms. I didn't check it. I just took another sip of my coffee, listening to the birds and knowing the firewall had done its job.